Well, we have paid the phone bill, and with a bit of luck and a following wind, Morgan Ortagus can hear me at the State Department. And I'll ask the question again, Morgan. The Chinese say, nothing to see here, don't know what the US is talking about. It's a case of they said, they deny that they were spying out of the Houston consulate.
Yeah, so obviously this is a very serious action, Richard, that this administration had to take. The last time, as you know, quite famously, that we had to ask a country to leave a consulate was whenever the Obama administration asked the Russians to leave after the election. And so there's a few things that the FBI and the Department of Justice have revealed. Director Wray actually talked about some of this on his July 7th speech. Attorney General Barr did as well. But essentially, we see the Houston Chinese consulate as the epicenter for research theft by the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. We've uncovered spy rings, but most importantly, I think what has been very troubling to us is the theft of research from our universities, from our hospitals, the theft of intellectual property, the theft from technology companies. And so the FBI and the Department of Justice have started to lay out the case and show the facts. Again, I would point your viewers back to Director Wray's speech, and we'll continue to give more examples. This is one of the most egregious things that we have seen in this country. And so ultimately, we had to make the decision to close down this consulate due to this massive, massive theft of our research and of our intellectual property.
All right. So are you prepared for the retaliation? Because we know that Beijing will retaliate. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
So all we want, and Secretary Pompeo will lay this out just in an hour when he gives a major speech on China from the Nixon Library in California. All we want is a reciprocal relationship with the Chinese government. We have had for almost 40 years, even longer, since Nixon went to China. The United States has tried engagement. We have tried bringing the Chinese government into the international fold, into organizations, into the rules-based order that we all know, enjoy, and exist. And under the leadership of Chairman Xi, what we have seen just these past few years, but really going back decades, there's not a private sector CEO in the technology business, in energy, in research, who won't come onto your show and admit that this sort of theft is a massive problem for these companies. So America sat by for Republican and Democrat administrations, hoping that if we just acquiesced, if we sort of ignored the problem, that we could get the Chinese Communist Communist Party to behave responsibly. Well, that hasn't happened, and now we're not going to tolerate $1 billion of theft, at least coming out of this consulate, of research.
Right, but wherever we look, relations between the US and China are dreadful. The Chinese believe that they are the worst that they've been in decades. Huawei, the spying scandal, the trade tariffs. I hear what you say about wanting good relations, but the evidence is against you when I look at the results.
So, Richard, I think what we want is a reciprocal relationship. We were just about 3 weeks ago, I was with Secretary Pompeo in Hawaii, meeting with the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our counterparts. And what they want is to continue to behave the same way that they've always behaved. You've seen the complete erosion of freedom and democracy and autonomy in Hong Kong. You see the Chinese locking up 1 million Muslims in camps, right? We have seen forced labor coming out of these camps, making materials that businesses around the world use. Nowhere else in the world are you seeing up to 1 million people locked up for their faith. We haven't seen this since World War II. So if the answer to this, in order to have a good relationship, is for us to ignore their bad behavior, that's not going to happen. We want a reciprocal relationship, and we want an honest relationship.
Can I turn to Brexit, if I may? And I know
Sure.
the Secretary of State was in London, and it's pretty clear now, they both pretty much said it, the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister and the Brexit Secretary, that it's not going to be possible to get a deal by the end of the year and the end of the transition. So, are you going to aim for sectoral agreements that can be put in place before the end of the year?
So, as you can imagine, trade was at the top of the agenda when we met with Prime Minister Johnson and Foreign Minister Rob. Always incredibly productive meetings. Our counterparts at the trade office here in Washington, D.C., are going to work that aggressively. Secretary Pompeo knows that's a priority for both sides of the Atlantic. And I will tell you, Richard, what's incredibly encouraging when we do meet with our counterparts in London with the Prime Minister is what we're seeing on things like Huawei. The British government made a strong choice for their own national security. You saw them stand up as it relates to the Hong Kong extradition treaty. So we have to talk about work around about issues around the world together, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. We could go through the gamut. There's not a major issue on the world stage where the United States doesn't work with Britain.
But I hesitate to use this phrase, bearing in mind its previous connotations, but you'll know what I mean. When you look at the way the British did act on Huawei, is there a quid pro quo, an implicit, nothing wrong with that in the sense, concerning, you know, all right, you helped us out with Huawei, we'll give you a little bit more with trade?
You know, I've been lucky for the past year and a half to travel around the world with Mike Pompeo, and I've been in almost every one of his meetings, and I've heard him say the same thing that he said to the Brits, that he said to the Israelis, that he said to the French, that he said to the Germans. The message is the same, that each country, we respect their sovereignty, and each country has to do their own risk assessment and determine for themselves if putting a 5G infrastructure into their country that is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party by law, by the way, this is by Chinese law that Huawei is beholden to that party, if that is what is in the best interest of each country. Britain did a risk assessment. They decided that was not in their best interest. Listen, we didn't have it right for the U.S. in a long time. We still have Huawei and some of our rural infrastructure. We had to get it out of some of our defense department, State Department. We haven't been right on this for a long time, but we recognize the threat. We're looking to stop it, and we're encouraging other countries who share intelligence with us and who are partners to do their own risk assessment. We believe that they're sophisticated enough to come to the same conclusion that we did.
Morgan, it's realistically, it's what, the 23rd of July, the election is in November. The common view now is that China is the whipping post for the Trump administration, for an electorate to show how strong the administration is going to be. And to some extent, the Chinese either will or will not, for their own purposes, accept that role during the presidential election.
Well, luckily, my boss, Mike Pompeo, has been on record for the over 2 years that he has been Secretary of State. He's made speeches talking about this. He was one of the first cabinet officials to question, starting at least back in February, if not January, about the fact that the Chinese Communist Party was not being open as it related to COVID-19. In February, he gave a speech to the governors. This was before the pandemic was so vocal in the United States. And he talked about in that speech about the threat that local municipalities and governors faced from the Chinese Communist Party trying to gain access and influence. So you could go back for the past 2.5 years, even his time at CIA director, where he has been very focused on this threat. And listen, I think that you can look at President Donald Trump and say, when he announced for president in 2015 and in that campaign, listen, I've been in foreign policy. This is my third administration that I've been in. We just simply were not talking about China 5 or 6 years ago, the way that the entire world is talking about it now. So all you have to do is, again, go back to those early speeches from President Trump, from Mike Pompeo, and you can see while things may be more vocal right now in terms of policy actions, we've been talking about this for a very long time, and I'm glad people are now paying attention.
And we're glad, Morgan, that you took time to join us tonight on Crestwings Business. Much appreciated. Thank you. We hopefully will talk again as things move on. Thank you.